So, Wei, thanks for that introduction. That's fascinating. I love your journey and hearing that. I also really found it interesting how you talked about the evolving nature of the business case. An exchange, we talked about it, matching engine, et cetera, and center of liquidity. But I like this essentially extension of the business model to create white label solutions. Fantastic. But I want to pick back up another little Easter egg that you just mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And you talked about the blockchain. And
Yes.
I think it really begs the question, why is the blockchain important, especially as it relates to carbon markets? Can you elaborate on that question for me?
Sure. I think the blockchain-based carbon exchange is actually really important for the market.
Hmm.
People often ask us why is that so? Because exchanges operate without being built on a blockchain backbone,
Yeah.
and they operate just fine today. But in the case of carbon, particularly when it comes to potentially the Article 6 carbon credits that are coming out,
Hmm.
which countries are going to be using against their NDCs, you may need a very secure system to track and trace the carbon credits. You need to understand and report how these carbon credits are being retired and used. Whose hands are the carbon credits in? When do they transfer across borders? All this information needs to be captured and also tracked and traced immutably. And it has to be, people have to have confidence in them. I mean, both from the seller country and as well as the buyer country, both participant that is buying and selling.
Mm.
So that's the power of the blockchain. But what's also really interesting is an application of the blockchain because we are able to track and trace the credits as they trade on our exchange. What we do is we actually return a portion of the fees back to the person who onboarded the carbon credits in the
That's
first
fascinating.
place. So, what this means is that you don't lose touch with the carbon credits once they're sold the first time. You can get a recurring stream of income as the carbon credits trade on the exchange. And one of the reasons why we have implemented this is because in the early carbon markets, we've all seen and heard stories of how project developers or communities or NGOs have developed projects and they have sold their carbon credits. And that's just one economic event for them.
Hmm.
These credits may then be taken into the markets further, sold again and again by middlemen. Sometimes these credits fetch significantly higher prices when they reach the right buyer. But the originating communities and the projects, they don't get to see the escalation in the price. Instead, they only have their one economic event where they may have sold it to a middleman. So here in this
Great
story,
use case.
what we want to do is to help these communities and these project developers also get their due
Hmm.
and to ensure that revenues are returned to them so that they can benefit from the trade in carbon credits as well. Because one of the narratives that's out there is that, trading in carbon credits is bad and encourages speculation. But this kind of activity, this kind of liquidity that's brought to the market is inevitable for
Hmm.
a healthy market.
Yes, and liquidity is really important for that.
Absolutely. It's just that the project developers, the originators, are feeling left out of this. So the question is more how to include them in a meaningful and equitable way
Hmm.
rather than to shut down trading.
I love that from as
Yeah,
a market proponent, the growth in the market in 2020 and 21, where it was essentially hitting the apex, and there was a lot of transactional flow, and we saw liquidity increase across all
absolutely.
exchanges. But I always thought about that, and so that's a really interesting paradigm shift that you're now leveraging the technology, not for technology's sake, but for a use case that's actually delivering
Yeah.
impact. That's
To make
great.
sure that the connection between the community and the projects is retained even
Mhm.
as the credits trade on the markets.
Yeah. That's great. And obviously, you also mentioned the potential use case here under Article 6. So in this case, am I correct in assuming that as a host country, whether we're leveraging your technology on the ACX side of the white label solution, any ITMOs, so at the national level, the units that are sold also can actually be traced and still generating a return in terms of that benefit sharing on fees?
Under the Article 6, the mechanisms still need to be determined by the national governments, especially for 6.2.
Hmm.
Exactly how are the credits going to be brought into another country's environment? What is the process for recognition? What is the process for corresponding adjustments to be made? That needs to be discussed between the governments.
Right.
But the blockchain can also be used to record all these transactions, which I'm sure will be meaningful and helpful to governments as they want to ensure that the transactions recorded are correct. At what point in time was the credits retired or brought into a different environment?
Like you, I'm a markets person. And so
Yes,
I understand the markets perspective, the transactional side. I understand the different let's say stakeholders, whether it's project developers and the communities and then the end buyers and the intermediaries therein, but I don't understand the technology, like a blockchain technology, because it's effectively very technical,
Yes,
right?
it
So,
can be.
but I do understand the point you're making, which is this immutability. It once it's on the blockchain, it can't be changed. So it's essentially gives a certainty. Like you were talking about a rational economic actor type of
Yes.
approach as an economist.
So when it comes to all these records, they're actually really important for tracking and tracing and providing evidence to everybody.
Yeah, great.
It's completely auditable
Mhm.
and it's reliable.
Okay. And is it accessible, like that auditability piece to external market participants, or is it proprietary? Like I'm just curious from a technical perspective.
From what I believe, from what I understand rather, you can actually keep it private if you want. You can have a private network if that's something one of our jurisdictions or one of our client wants.
Mhm.
So there are certain jurisdictions who may feel that this is information that they wish to keep for themselves because it affects or it relates to the status of their NDCs and they
Yeah.
want to keep the information confidential. That's entirely something that can be done or arranged for. But it's important that while it's confidential, that you have that record so you can
course.
access it. It's confidential but accessible by the right people.
That's really powerful. That is really transformative. Do you mind if I take a little bit of a tangent and then talking about blockchains and the kind of like it's essentially a data layer, right? So are you working with the CAD Trust here in Singapore also that are trying to effectively unlock the potential for blockchain in carbon markets? Because they're seemingly having a similar ambition.
Yeah, we are having conversations with CAD, and yeah, it remains to be seen how collaboration will go
how it
forward.
plays out.
Yes.
Seems to be a lot of commonalities, so maybe I'm reading between the lines.
Well, as you have seen, we like to put in all our efforts and all our actions, and then deliver.
Yeah, I like that. Let's drink to that. That's fantastic.
Yes, thank
I
you.
like that pragmatism at heart.
Yes.